In the last episode, we promised that we would discuss why plantar fasciitis happens. So today we're going to go over the risk factors and the root causes. So welcome to episode 3 of the Runner's Soul, the podcast where running meets science stride by stride. And as ever, I'm Sharon, your resident podiatrist, runner, and unapologetic foot nerd. All right, runners, let's lace up and let's dive into today's stride. Last week, we dug deep into the anatomy of the plantar fascia, unsung hero that makes your every step possible. No wonder it gets a little bit sore at times. We talked about how it works like a bowstring under your arch, storing and releasing energy just like a spring, and protecting your feet from collapsing under pressure. Today, we're going to answer the million-dollar question that you've all been thinking of. Why does plantar fasciitis actually happen? This is where things start to click for a lot of my patients and my runner friends and colleagues. Because once you understand the risk factors, the things that load your fascia beyond what it can handle, you'll see for yourself that plantar fasciitis isn't some mysterious curse. It's predictable, it's inevitable, but it is preventable. And most importantly, it's treatable when you get to the root cause. So let's break down the top culprits, explore how they sneak into your training and daily life, and talk about what you can do to stay ahead of the game. First up, and honestly, the biggest reason plantar fasciitis happens is, you guessed it, overload. Now, I know what you're thinking, runners. Overload? But I'm thin. No surprise there, but let's really unpack what this looks like in real life, no matter what your size. Imagine your plantar fascia like a rope bridge, strong, flexible, designed to hold weight. But if you suddenly send an army of elephants across instead of a few hikers, what do you think happens? That bridge is going to strain, stretch, and maybe even tear, and need some maintenance. So overload, it can happen in so many different ways. So we might have a runner who doubles their mileage in a training cycle. We might have a gym goer who starts doing box jumps and weighted carries without easing into it. Say a new nurse suddenly walking 12-hour shifts on the hospital concrete floors after years sitting at a desk job or years at college. And it's that sudden jump in demand that sets the fascia up for micro tears. So think about your own life. Did you recently take on more steps than usual? Have you been training for your first marathon? Maybe you just got a new puppy and suddenly you're walking 5 extra kilometers a day. Overload doesn't always look like sports. It can sneak in through lifestyle shifts too. Next up, let's talk about biomechanics, which is just a fancy way of saying the way you're built. And in particular, we're going to be discussing your foot mechanics. So some of us are born with arches that collapse more than others. If your feet roll in too much, that's what we call overpronation. And that constant stretching tugs on your plantar fascia with every step. Over time, the fascia gets irritated. For people who overpronate, there tends to be a lot more movement in the foot, a lot more movement during gait than there should be normally. But here's the kicker. It's not just flat feet. People with very high arches are also at risk. High arches, they don't absorb shock very well. So instead of distributing the impact, the fascia acts like the crash pad. And don't even get me started on tight calves and stiff ankles. If your Achilles tendon doesn't stretch well, your foot can't flex properly. And guess what picks up the slack? Yep, you've guessed it. The poor fascia. So here's a case example. One of my patients, a teacher in her 40s, came to me with stubborn heel pain. She had the flattest arches I'd seen in a while, and her ankles were so tight she could barely do a calf stretch. Every step was pulling her fascia like a rubber band stretched to its limit. Once we addressed her mechanics with orthotics and mobility work and exercises, hey presto, the pain started to ease. Let's zoom out and look at lifestyle factors. Starting with the shoes. Oh, shoes. They can make or break your fascia. Worn out running shoes. They're like driving a car on ball tires. You're just asking for trouble. And don't even get me started on those unsupportive shoes like the flip-flops and the ballet flats. Yes, they might look pretty. Yes, they might look feminine. Yes, they look cute. But your fascia will pay the price. And then, of course, weight changes. Pregnancy, gaining or losing weight quickly, even just seasonal changes in activity, all shift the load your feet carry. And we'll all be in danger with Christmas coming up. We're going to eat too much. We're all going to put on a little bit of weight. So the fascia doesn't complain immediately, but after a few weeks, months, those micro little tears, they all add up and stretch the fascia. And then there's the surfaces. So think about where you run or walk. Concrete, sidewalks, these are brutal on the fascia. Grass, dirt trails, or synthetic tracks, yes, much more forgiving. You have to remember that when we were made, Mother Nature didn't think we were going to be walking on all these man-made surfaces like concrete and tiles and all that bitumen. So no wonder our bodies start to react, because we are walking on surfaces that we just weren't made for. And one patient told me her pain only started after moving to a new neighborhood where she trained excessively on sidewalks instead of the trails that she was used to using. So just that one little change was enough to just throw everything off balance. Now let's talk about two underrated but very powerful factors. Recovery and, I'm afraid to say, age. If you're a runner who never stretches, never rests, and ignores all your body's little warning signs, plantar fascia is like the debt collector who finally comes knocking on your door. You can only delay payments for so long. Age adds another layer. most cases show up between the ages of 40 and 60. Why? Because connective tissue naturally loses its elasticity as we age. And also people who might be pre-menopause, post-menopause, the fascia just isn't as bouncy as it was in your 20s. That doesn't mean you're doomed. Doesn't mean that we can't make it stronger, but it does mean recovery and load management become even more important than ever. So pulling it all together, plantar fasciitis is rarely caused by just one thing. It's usually a perfect storm. Picture this. A 45-year-old office worker decides to start running to get healthy. Great. She buys a cheap pair of shoes with no support because she doesn't know any better. She has flat feet, so the arches aren't supported. She hasn't stretched her calves in 20 years. She walks barefoot around the house and then starts thinking she can run 5 days a week on concrete sidewalks. By week 3, she's limping out of bed in the morning. Does that sound familiar to anybody? That is how the storm hits. The fascia doesn't snap all at once. Builds into micro damage day after day until suddenly you feel that sharp heel pain, and then it's hard to ignore. Let's reflect on what we know already. So let me pause and ask you these questions. Or these could be questions you need to ask yourself if you do experience heel pain. Have you noticed heel pain first thing in the morning? Where you get out of bed? Do you know if you have flat feet or high arches? Are your shoes more than a year old, or do they feel dead underfoot? Do you sometimes feel you don't feel much different between walking barefoot and having your shoes on? Have you recently increased your mileage, your standing hours, your job, or has your body weight changed? These are all questions which aren't about blame. They're just about awareness. Because once you know your risk factors, you can then actually do something about it. To wrap up today's stride, overload is the number one trigger for plantar fasciitis. Foot mechanics, whether flat or high arches, change how your fascia absorbs stress and shock absorption. Lifestyle choices like your shoes, your weight, and training surfaces all add up. Recovery and age matter. Your fascia needs care, rest, and support, and TLC just like the rest of you. And most importantly, plantar fasciitis happens when several of these collide and not just one. And that sets us up perfectly for next episode. Because understanding the risk factors is one thing, but how do you know if your heel pain is actually plantar fasciitis and not something else? So in our next stride, in episode 4, we're going to talk about diagnosis and differential diagnosis. We'll cover how podiatrists sort through the possibilities, the classic signs of plantar fasciitis, and what other conditions can mimic it. And hey, I'd love for you all to join our community on Facebook. It's a great place where we can all meet and support each other and share your stories, connect with real people, and keep the conversation going beyond the podcast. I'll drop the link in the show notes so you can join us there. So lace up, take care of your feet this week, and I'll see you in the next stride.